It's really an extraordinary thing to trace just how deep Shakespeare runs in American political life and civic life. We think of Shakespeare as the national writer of England. He sailed across the ocean with those who settled the colonies and the New World in the early 17th century and never really left. And he's so deeply entwined in sort of every major moment, including the crazy crisis, the pandemic that we're in right now, that he sort of rises to a level of depth and I don't know, cultural penetration, if you will, that it's hard to imagine anything other than, say, the US Constitution and the Bible coming anywhere near, and the famous line about this in the early 19th century, the French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville took a tour of the United States in 1830s, I believe, and sort of then wrote it up in a famous book called Democracy in America. And he said the famous line about there's scarcely a pioneer's hut where you can't find a copy of Shakespeare. He was everywhere.
Pretty much all of the members of the Constitutional Convention knew Shakespeare, read Shakespeare, had copies in their libraries at home. And it was a kind of shared language. You could make a quotation from Shakespeare and everyone would get the reference. And so this is something that no matter what side of the debate that you were on, that they shared. They shared a knowledge of Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare himself did not represent the kind of constitutional republic that we were forming. But I mean, there's lots of little speeches within Shakespeare that did express kind of universal ideas that helped to make the founders, make the members of the Constitutional Convention, give them something that they could share.
In particular with Adams, you see someone who is concerned about constitution making having balance. And this is what precisely you lack in the history plays in Shakespeare. We see the problems of not having, say, a written constitution, lacking consent, prerogatives of whether lords or the royal family that are unwritten, that these are things that lead to a contest for political legitimacy. The only play, I believe, where England is at peace with itself and with its neighbors is King Lear, right? And so in Lear, you've got this play that sets itself up, not in terms of what would make for good rule, but what would make for legitimate succession. Who will follow Lear is at least implicitly one of the themes of that great play. And what Adams and I believe the founders drew from a playwright who did not write about democracies was precisely the lessons that we need to have to make sure that power, whether wielded by the few or the many, how power needs to be accountable, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be structured, brings us to the Constitution, in such a way that it cannot be wielded by either the few or the many without being balanced by others.